Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm here to speak about data privacy. We've just heard a very interesting presentation. In fact, I'm a lucky man, I should say. Thank you to Omar for building the agenda. We've just heard from PhD specialists on exactly why we have risks in companies. And in fact, this gentleman has very ably presented the first part of my presentation for you. My first slide was to explain to you the risk that companies face with data breaches, but we've already heard very well all the different issues that exist today in data security. So I don't need to go through this. We've just heard how every day organizations are facing more and more problems in terms of managing the risks that they have, managing to keep their compliance against regulations, and ensuring that they're not going to be losing data on a regular basis. The statistics here show something like 84% of enterprises are suffering at least one data breach every year. I think the results are probably a lot higher than this. As we've just heard from the specialist, this idea of people, it's not so much hackers trying to enter the system and cause damage. These are people entering systems and slowly, silently filtering away data, and they're stealing data. It's not about causing disruption or bringing down systems. There's this threat from attackers entering systems. Not only that, we've also heard how many of these cases are not external hackers. These are individuals that work inside the companies, people who already have access to the systems. They have no need to hack in through firewalls or get through password systems. They're already there with the power in their hand to do this. So there's many examples of constant areas where we have data breaches, and as you've heard from the gentleman, this is something that's of increasing importance every day. I was speaking with the journalist before the event this morning. She asked for some comment on how did I view the market. It's certainly something that's extremely important to us now. Just 3, 4, 5 years ago, I personally and the people that I meet were not really talking about data privacy so much. It was not a big issue. But now, as we've heard from Mark, with things like big data, we have more and more data. We have this data spread all over the place. Suddenly, the issues of data privacy and keeping this data secure is more and more important every day. So this is an extremely important area for Informatica, and also a very big growth area for us, as more and more of our customers are now looking to address these issues. So what are the typical challenges? Again, we've already heard in great detail from the doctor about the sort of challenges of securing data. In terms of a business perspective and the enterprises and customers we deal with, there are lots of different issues. So with things like your QA environments, we're taking production data that has sensitive values and we're copying that many times over. This isn't 1 or 2 copies. This data is moved into many different environments and is spread around. And suddenly you lose control because the data, the sensitive information you have, is not just in one place. Suddenly everyone's got a copy of it somewhere, and this causes a big risk. Likewise for development and supports. So as we've heard, it's the internal people, maybe a DBA or some administrator. They already have access to this data, and they can actually steal this data for a friend. Maybe they're trying to find someone's phone number. They can, if they work at a bank, maybe they can look up people's salary information. So this is critical challenges that exist from personnel within the bank. Another thing we heard about before from the doctor was about this is not incoming attacks, so not data and incoming. We need to look at how we share data as well. In today's world, we often need to take data and send it out to people for outsourcing. Maybe we're using a third-party consultancy for development, or maybe we're working with other partners. The ability to take this data and give this realistic data to third parties is very difficult. We heard you can't just encrypt the data. If you encrypt the data, it's useless to someone without the key, but then, so they can't use it. If you give them the key, then all of a sudden they have all this sensitive data that they can use. So we have to selectively look at how we can anonymize and mask this data. Finally, as well as the internal administrators, the DBAs, the externals, we also have the everyday people working with the customer's data. In a call center, in a bank or in a telco or these sorts of organizations, every day there are end users that need to use this data every day. We can't just block them. We can't say, take away their power to look at this data. We need to be able to allow them to use this data, but at the same time, not see the sensitive data that they don't need to see every day. So this causes some conflicts. We have different people within the organization that have different needs out of data and different requirements in terms of risk and compliance. So I've put at the bottom typical people who want access to more data. So someone like a QA manager is looking for more and more environments in which to do development and test. Someone who needs realistic data. They can't deal with data that has XXXX in it because it's just been starred out. They need realistic data which they can use. This is pitched against some of maybe the compliance or the security people in the organization that are trying to close down the data. They want to block access, they want to, they're at risk if the data is breached, if the data is released, and that can cause an issue for them, both financially through fines from regulatory bodies, or also just the political fallout for having a public data breach. So there's a conflict here in the organization, and we need to be able to manage this. The other aspect we heard, again from the doctor, was this is not just about anonymizing data. There's a complexity around this. It's not just about the actual final solution, but we need to put in place a number of reusable assets around the idea of data privacy. Firstly, the people involved. This is not one set of people. It's not a DBA's task to look after data masking or data privacy. Likewise, it's not purely the role of a compliance officer to set the policies. Many different people in the organization are involved in ensuring data privacy within a company. Likewise, the processes, the way we go about data privacy, you can't just dive in and start anonymizing data without really understanding, firstly, where your sensitive data is or how you need to use it. And also, we heard, again, the huge amounts of data, the vast amounts of data we're now dealing with. We need to work out where the sensitive data lies. Typically, it's only a small percentage of data that's critical, but we need to understand where that critical data exists in our mountains and mountains of big data. And finally, of course, we need, hopefully, a technology solution to allow us to work with these people, work with these processes, and ensure data privacy. So just taking those three elements one at a time. Firstly, the people. Do we have people from risk or compliance, or some people who have some sort of role and risk in their job in the room? Anyone? That's always a danger asking the question. I should ask it the other way. Put your hands up if you don't have any risk or compliance. No, okay. So it's a critical role, but these people are typically working at a high level. So they understand the regulatory pressures, they understand the compliance and risk factors, but they're not technical people. They don't understand the bits and the bytes of the data. So that's why as we move down the scale, we have also technologists, DBAs, analysts that have a closer focus on the data itself, but they need to work together with these risk and compliance people to ensure data privacy. Secondly, I mentioned there was a process. Addressing data privacy is not just about diving in and anonymizing your data. We need to define what we want to do first. So typically, the process of defining the policy, defining what you need to do at an organizational level falls under the role of someone like a compliance officer. They understand what is sensitive data and what is not sensitive. They understand how we need to anonymize data. Are the dates of birth of our customers important or not? Is their address important? There will be certain factors that are critical and others that are not so important. It's important up front to define these policies and the way that we classify data at the beginning. The second important step of the process is discovering where this sensitive data exists. We may think at the beginning we know where sensitive data lies, but it's the classic case of the unknown unknowns, as Runfelt would say. It's no good anonymizing just the data you think is sensitive, but you've left loads of sensitive information in a comments field, let's say. So let's say you've gone through carefully, anonymized all your data in a CRM system, you've taken out your customer details, but you've left these big free text fields of notes where people have been putting sensitive information about their payment methods or the things that are happening in their life. So the discovery process is extremely important to give you better coverage about understanding where you have critical data. Once we've defined the policies, understood where sensitive data is, we can then start to apply the processes of data masking and anonymization to secure that data. And then finally, the very important step is actually measuring and monitoring what you've done. You can have the definitions in place, you can discover your data, and you can apply the technology, but if you're not actually validating what you're doing, you don't know that you've actually correctly desensitized your data. A common example could be a development environment or a test environment. You carefully anonymize all the data, you think, okay, I'm happy that's secure data. But what happens a week later, a developer comes along and goes, oh, actually, I need to test this use case that we've had in production. They start loading some real data from production into the development environment. Maybe they make some updates with their DBA tools. All of a sudden, you've now got sensitive data in a zone or an environment that you thought was secure. Next week, you may then start shipping that out to other outsourcers, for example. So we need to go through this constant process of measuring and monitoring everything that's done to make sure that the data has been sensitized, but it also stays safe as well. So this is a critical part of the process that many vendors will not typically talk about. So we've heard a lot about the problems of data privacy, a lot of the concerns and a lot of the things we need to address. Thankfully, Informatica has a solution. So let's have a look about how we can help you address these issues. Now, there are two major issues that we've heard about in terms of protecting your sensitive production data. So wherever this data may exist, typically you're going through some sort of process, either through a subsetting process or a cloning process. There's some methods you follow within your organizations that takes this production information and puts it into your non-production environments. That is your development environments, your test environments, your training environments. Anytime you copy production sensitive data out of your highly controlled, highly regulated production environment into one of these things, you're looking at problems of a data breach. All of a sudden, hundreds of people have access to these sorts of systems. Myself, as working for a software vendor, every time I go to customers, sometimes we're working on POCs or we're working on developments. You know, we get given the passwords to these environments. We have access to them as a third party. So you have to be very careful what you're doing with these environments. Because these are non-production environments, we follow a method called persistent data masking. This is where we permanently overwrite, anonymize, and change data in these environments to make sure it's secure. So we go through a process of identifying where the sensitive data is and permanently modifying it forever. So it can never be reversed, it can't be discovered. And if one of these environments was to fall into the hands of someone else, they're just looking at effectively test data that has no privacy implications. That's all very well for protecting my non-production environments, but what about the production data? I still have sensitive data here in my production system, and I still have users every day that are accessing this data. How do I protect that data? Well, clearly I can't follow the same process. If I was to overwrite all my production data persistently with values, I would have screwed up all my data, and that's not going to make me very popular. So I need a way to mask this data, but I need to do this dynamically on the fly. So the users that every day are accessing these production systems, I need to follow a process that we call dynamic data masking that allows us to, on the fly, change this data as it's presented to a user. And this then makes it safe for consumption. Now I'm going to go into a bit more detail about the first area, the persistent data masking. So we've already saw a similar chart about the types of techniques we can use to anonymize data. So if we have some sensitive data in my development environment that I need to anonymize, I can do something like shuffling IDs. So by moving the IDs within each column, I still have realistic IDs. So these IDs still look like an ID, but now they're pointing to a different person. So this gives us some level of anonymization or security. I may want to use what we call process of substitution. So in a name field, again, I don't want to write XXXX into my name field because the data doesn't look realistic anymore. I can't do realistic testing on it. I can't do realistic development on it. With something like a name, it's quite easy for me to have a dictionary of Turkish names, and I can just replace my first name or my surname with these dictionaries at random to produce realistic data, but non-sensitive data. Likewise, other techniques can be used for codifying columns, or in the case of something like credit cards, it's a well-understood data domain. I can follow specific techniques for masking them in a way that is still usable for the business. Informatica's solution for persistent data masking is built around a specific interface for this. So this is not a rehash of software we already had, or taking, let's say, an ETL process and saying, look, we can kind of do some masking for you. Here we go. Here's our PowerPoint presentation about how great we are at data masking. We've now specifically built a user interface for this. It allows us to involve all people in the business, including non-technical users. So people like compliance officers can sit down and use this tool to define the policies they need to do and work together with the technical people to ensure that the right data is masked in the right way. We've also built the masking technology on top of our data integration platform. As you've heard already, our integration platform can connect to data wherever it exists. It's a well-known, well-considered, mature product, and so we've built the fundamental aspects on top of this platform. Certain things you need to do out of the box for compliance. There are a number of industry bodies that look after things. So examples are things like PII or PCI. These are the industry regulations for how organizations should be desensitizing their data or protecting their data. So out of the box, we can give you a quick start on many of these types of masking, but clearly there's infinite flexibility in terms of how you master data and using which different techniques. There's a list of them here, but I won't go into detail. The final point, in fact, if you remember, the process of the end part of the process was the ability to measure and monitor what you're doing. As we've heard about data breaches, sometimes you perhaps have to accept that some things are inevitable. No, you can't completely mitigate your risk. There's always a small risk. No matter what you do, there's always a chance that someone will get access to your data and release it. In that case, in terms of when you're in front of the regulatory bodies who are looking at what you've done, if you can prove and audit your ability, you can prove your willingness to work with them and say, look, we've put our best practices in place, we've made the data sensitive, here are the logs, the documentation to show that we've done that. This is also an extremely important point to the process to help in terms of your regulation and your compliance to these regulations. These reports can be created very simply in a PDF format that allows these documents to be used within the compliance and risk departments. As I mentioned, this particular type of persistent data masking is for development and test environments. Today I'm talking about data privacy, so I'm not going to go into detail about what we call our subset product, but just to explain to you that the data masking that we do is fundamentally built into and a key part of our subset solution, which is the solution that allows you to take your production data and create valid functional copies for your development environments. So this, again, is not a standalone solution that sits in isolation from everything else. It's this fundamental part of our platform that allows you to create these environments in a very safe and secure manner. Okay, the second part, if you remember, of the data masking is not just the development and test environments, but also the production environments that you have data in. Now again, production data, we have to have it, we have to use it, we can't just turn the machine off, as you say. The safest machine is a machine that's off, but unfortunately for production data we need to have these machines on and we need to use them. However, not all the users need access to all of the data. There are many, many cases where the end users of these applications need to work with this data. They maybe need to be able to look at customers, deal with those customers, but it's not necessary for them in their everyday job to know the home address of this person. If I'm a bank employee talking to someone about, I don't know, a recent transaction they made, in that moment I don't need to see their address. It's not relevant to me. I need to work with that customer, I need to use the system for that customer, but I don't need to see all the data. So the idea behind our dynamic data masking solution is to provide role-specific masking to production data. So what that means is if I have an authorized user, a senior analyst or an administrator, they can connect to the database, they can connect to the application as they normally would and see the values exactly as they are in the database. For a non-authorized user or someone working in offshore, they can see these values changed in real time so that the data is no longer sensitive. And the types of masking I can do depend on the role and can be adjusted for the role. Someone who's working internally will have different masking requirements to someone working in an offshore example. An example of how that looks is here. So this is an example from PeopleSoft. So this is the PeopleSoft screen that someone's using the end interface. They have the data there. They can see in this case, an employee. They can see the person. But where there's critical information, the data has been masked, so they can't do it. Now you'll notice that the application is still allowing them to work with this record. Applications often have inbuilt functionality to say this user can or can't do something. But we're not talking about blocking access. We have to allow these users to use the data and use the application's functionality, but we're just hiding specific values from them that they don't need to see. Another example of this is not just the end users. We talked also about how administrators or DBAs or internally people have access to directly to the database, not just through the application. So it's no good just to secure the application if a DBA can come in and attach to the database on the interface and do a select star and bring all the customer information. So because we work fundamentally on the database level, we block access even to a DBA or even to someone who has the system password. Whenever they write a select statement, they will still get back these masked values. And this is critical in protecting your data even against possibly rogue elements inside your business. Again, the same would apply for a hacker. Maybe they get access to the system, they have root access, they can do anything they want, but even still, when they query the database, they're not going to see the critical values. So this is also extremely important for protecting not just your application, but also the raw data that exists on the system. Now, there are some, whenever I speak to customers about dynamic data masking, the concept isn't immediately clear sometimes. Maybe that's my explanation, or maybe it's the technology is quite unique and different. But a lot of people say, well, I've already got a solution for that. I can already do that with something I have in-house. My answer to that is if you don't have a product, you don't have a solution for this problem, because as of today, until some of our other competitors start to develop this, it really is a unique piece of functionality in terms of what we do. There are many parallel technologies, many technologies that do something similar, but they don't allow you to work in the effective way that we can do. So let me just cover quickly some examples. So encryption is a common one. People can say, well, I just turn on encryption in my database. It's encrypted, that makes it safe, right? Well, not really. It makes it safe in terms of the disk storage. If someone comes and steals your server, or maybe they have access to the files themselves, it's true, it's encrypted. You can't get at the data. But of course, that data has to be de-encrypted every time the application uses it. So you're still not protecting yourselves from the application users or the DBAs that every time they query that data. So it's only a partial solution. Likewise, there are a number of vendors around solutions that they call themselves database activity monitoring, or DAM vendors. So an example of this is something like the IBM Guardium solution. Now these solutions were built up around trying to audit activity and see what's going on. It's very much a monitoring type of behavior, as the name suggests. So it's true, if someone comes in and starts writing select statements that that they shouldn't be doing, it will send alarms off in different places. But again, you haven't stopped that data coming out. It hasn't been blocked. If you turn on the blocking thing, then you're then suddenly stopping the people again doing their work. You can't block people from doing their everyday work. So this is why a solution like this doesn't allow you to selectively mask information. Other areas are things like database access control. So you may have heard of things like row-level security. Oracle VPD is an example of this that comes pretty much for free inside an Oracle database. What this allows you to do is change access on a row-based principle. So when a user logs in, they have access to certain tables and areas, but you can also add an extra level of granularity on the rows. But again, all you're doing is blocking or not blocking rows. If I write a rule saying, Alistair shouldn't have access to these important customers I have, and change the where clause in such a way that I don't see those rows, all of a sudden that data disappears for me. It's no longer in the application. I can't use it, I can't do my job, and it's no use to me. It just makes the information disappear. Again, I'm not selectively masking sensitive records. Finally, another solution is around tokenization, most typically used for things like credit card information in a web-facing application. So any application that's on the web or as part of a web application is very vulnerable to attack. So it's bad best practice to keep credit card information within the system. So what you do is you store that in a separate secure area, and you use a kind of a token lookup to allow you to get that data only as and when needed. The idea behind this, if the key database is breached, all the attacker has is the token information. But again, this needs extensive application development happening. So your applications that you have today, you have to modify them, you have to tell them, you can't just take this value again as a select, you need to do a lookup, you need to go to a different database. There's a lot of work that has to be done here. Again, the Informatica solution is a completely seamless way of putting this on the database level. That means you need to make no changes at the application level and no retraining for the end users. So just a sort of, in summary about the data masking solution, it allows you to dramatically decrease the risk of your breach. If not even your DBAs or your administrators or your application users can access this data, then you can be fairly confident that an external person would also have great difficulty. It's an extremely easy solution to deploy. Typically POCs, when we do this, are only 1 or 2 days. It's very quick to install, very quick to deploy, and suddenly the customer can see the value very, very quickly. And also in terms of the cost, in terms of reducing your risk of breaches and reducing the risk of to your image under a data breach is also very important. These are the intangible, the benefits, if you like. Mark was talking about reducing the costs of data. It's hard to put a dollar value on having your company's name on the front pages of the newspaper on a Monday morning, but it's still a very important intangible for you to avoid. Just to finish off with some customer examples, Mark already talked about ING in terms of compliance, but we also have many other customers around the world. Here in Turkey we have customers, so both Avaya and Vodafone are securing their systems with our software. If I take an example of Orange, so they deployed our technology across many of their systems, allowing them to secure everywhere they have sensitive data, things like their billing systems, their CRM systems. In terms of reducing costs as well, so this is not spending money for the fun of spending money. We're looking here to reduce the costs. Hot is a good example. They're a cable company that provides telephone and internet services to their customers. They had a problem where they had kind of unofficial security breaches all the time. The call center staff were looking up the details and the phone numbers of celebrities, of politicians, and passing them to the press or to friends. And they were having this constant leakage of data that, although they weren't being fined or given problems in the media, they were finding these staff that they'd done this and they had to keep firing them. They were losing staff because they had to keep, these people had breached the data. So by putting this solution in place, they'd managed to reduce their churn and the problems with this sort of data these sorts of data leaks. Well, thank you for listening today. I hope it's been useful. It's been a high-level overview of our data privacy solution. So if you'd like some more detail, if you'd like to understand better how the technology works, please come and see me afterwards. Thank you.